meet its commitments under international law and ban corporal punishment. As it stands under Irish law, parents, legal caregivers, childminders and foster parents have the right to punish children physically under reasonable chastisement. However, CEO of Children's Rights Alliance Tanya Ward says the law is unacceptable and all forms of violence against children are wrong. Tanya joins me this morning to discuss this in more detail. Good morning, Tanya.
Good morning.
I think people will be shocked to find out. I mean, parents is one thing, but when they hear childminders, they sort of get up in arms and say, hang on a second, my childminder will not lay a hand on my child. But that sort of shows a contradiction in terms. Why would it be okay for parents but not for somebody else?
Absolutely, and if you think more generally about people's attitudes toward corporal punishment, in Ireland corporal punishment was widely practised in schools, and today you would never accept a teacher to strike your child, and yet in the home people do accept that it's okay to strike children. And generally when it happens, why it happens, it's because a parent or the person caring for the child has lost control and they're finding it difficult to discipline the child, rather than it's a form of considered discipline.
I think parents would imagine that let them decide the punishment, let them decide the severity of the punishment, especially when you talk about schools. I mean, of old, the cane would be used and all kinds of things. Parents want to be in control of it. What about the argument that's put out time and time again? I was smacked growing up, did me no harm. What about just a small tap, won't do any harm? Well, what do you say to that? I mean, do you accept that there may be times where that comes in?
Well, look, the reason why there's a complaint being made against Ireland to the European Committee on Social Rights is because children have a right not to be subjected to any form of violence in all settings. And for every person who tells you, look, I was hit, had no impact on me, there is another person who said it had a very serious impact on me. There's lots of research demonstrating the negative consequences of striking and hitting children in the home. You often find they have lower self-esteem, they're potentially more likely to be a victim of domestic violence, they could be a perpetrator of domestic violence, because it sends a strong message to children that when you're angry, when you're unhappy, it's okay to actually use physical violence as well against someone. And it actually doesn't help with discipline in the long term. It has an immediate effect on a child, but actually it can result in the child becoming very defiant and you having to resort to more extreme forms of discipline to try and control their behaviour. And to be fair, the majority of people in this country don't strike their children at home, they don't hit their children, they find other ways to deal with, to discipline their children. But there is a minority, and introducing a ban would actually send a very positive message about the way we actually value children in this country and we value childhood, and it would encourage parents to think and explore other ways to discipline their children.
Well, we'll get to the ban in a moment and how you sort of see that working and being policed, but what about the other methods? I mean, one of the most famous ones is the super nanny, naughty step, or whatever people want to call it. And even when you watch the show, I mean, a kid can be brought back 50 times to the naughty step before they get it. And that's fine while all the TV cameras are there. But when real life kicks in, and I think it's worth telling the viewers that you also have a toddler and a baby, you know what it's like. You're trying to cook dinner, you know, you're trying to work, you're trying to do everything. Are these other new age ways of disciplining really going to work with modern family life?
Well, look, I understand it. I'm muddling around like everyone else trying to get through the day. But I think with discipline, it's about being consistent, and it's about trying to find the way that has an impact on your child. A lot of the time it's about having very strict limits on certain things, sticking to those limits, and there's a lot of work in it. You know, there's not a lot of work in striking a child. There is a lot of work in trying to be consistent, and introducing maybe a reward system. I was looking at a lot of the comments and feedback I got back from parents yesterday, and some of them were saying, I have a brownie system, I have a little star system where every time the child does something good, little stars go up on the fridge, they love it. Every time they do something bad, I take the stars off the fridge. So there's lots of different ways to use positive parenting methods to encourage your child, you know, to behave in a certain way. Like, discipline is important with children. You need to kind of demonstrate as well that you're in control and that you're disciplined, and certainly striking a child is the last way to demonstrate that.
So what about the ban then? I mean, it's not necessarily comparing like with like, but if you look at the smoking ban, that sent out a message that smoking is not healthy and made people perhaps think twice. Now,
yeah,
it's got more popular and, you know, people like to go out to the smoking area. But as I say, it's not like with like. Do you see it like that, just sending out a message and that people may be fined as opposed to locked up and thrown away the key if they're caught hitting their child in public?
Well, legally what it'll mean is that they just can't rely on the defence of reasonable and moderate chastisement in the law if there's a case being taken against them. But it's been introduced in 22 countries throughout Europe and it hasn't resulted in parents being dragged through the courts and cases being taken against parents. What it did result in was a change in attitudes about what's acceptable, and in those countries the government introduced public awareness campaigns and supports for parents to help them explore other ways to discipline their children. I do think it will be a bit like the smoking ban, though, in Ireland. If you remember when that was introduced, people said there's absolutely no way people are going to stick to this, and there's nearly 100% compliance. So certainly something like a prohibition would have a big impact on attitudes in Ireland. We only have to look to corporal punishment in schools. There was the same type of resistance. There were many people who said, look, we won't be able to discipline children in our schools, and now it's completely unacceptable to use corporal punishment against children in schools. I think it's going to go the same way.
What's this complaint that's been made against Ireland that Children's Minister Francis Fitzgerald has until the end of the month to reply to?
Well, the complaint is that children have a right to be protected from all forms of violence in all settings, and the government hasn't done enough to ensure that. They've introduced some public awareness programmes for parenting, but they haven't removed that defence of reasonable chastisement and moderate chastisement in the law. And in order to protect children's rights, they need to introduce a ban. So, I mean, the key thing here is leadership from the government and leadership from the minister, because you'll find in many countries you often didn't have public support and sentiment behind a ban, but it actually came once the ban was introduced. It changes people's attitude. So really it's about leadership from this current government.
And sending out a message. Well, you've certainly made your message clear. Thank you very much for coming in, Tanya Ward there from the Children's Rights Alliance.